Welcome back to Panda's Nightmares. Tonight, we're diving into real-life glitch in the matrix. Stories, those eerie moments when reality itself seems to break. People have experienced time loops, impossible coincidences, and encounters that defy all logic. These stories will leave you wondering, are we living in a simulation? Is reality as stable as we think? Before we begin, I want to share something personal. I'm raising funds for my dad's medical treatment, and any support would mean the world to me. If you'd like to help, the GoFundMe link is in the description below. Thank you for being here now. Let's step into the strange and unexplainable. Story 1. When I was around 20, I kept having recurring dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora, pronounced Aurora. The dreams were always different, but she was always present. Her distinct face and her name would appear in every one. I would wake up feeling frustrated and confused, spending hours searching online for any clues about her identity or my connection to her. After a few months, the dreams stopped, and I eventually dismissed them as my mind playing tricks on me. A few years later, on Halloween 2009, I was in the car with a friend at a gas station. I was about to pull out and merge onto the highway when I received a phone call from a random number. I stopped the car to answer, but no one responded. As I sat there puzzled, the driver behind me grew impatient, honked, and then swerved in front of my car instead of waiting a couple of seconds. Moments later, a silver Civic lost control and collided with the car that had swerved. Both drivers died on impact. I realized that it could have been me if I had not taken that phone call. Shaken by the incident, I called the number later that night out of both gratitude and curiosity. The call rang 3 times before going to voicemail with a message. "Hi, you have reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number." I have never experienced goosebumps like that before. The next day, I called again, and this time a woman answered. I told her my entire story, including the recurring dreams, and she explained that she had no idea how I had gotten her number. She claimed she had never called me. I asked if she had a Facebook account to confirm her identity, and when I checked her profile, I was stunned. It was indeed her. The whole experience left me with more questions than answers. If this is not a glitch in the matrix, then I must be completely out of my mind. Story 2. This happened about 15 years ago. I called my friend, but he wasn't home, so I left a message on his answering machine. I said, "Hey, it's me, Killer Extremists. Sorry I missed you. Call you later. Bye." Then I hung up and left the house. I made no other calls that day. Later, my friend called me back and said, "Wow, that was quite a message you left. Who was that girl you were talking to?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him, "What are you talking about? I wasn't talking to any girl," but he insisted. So I went over to his house to listen to the message. Sure enough, after my initial message, exactly as I had left it, there was a slight pause, and then the recording continued for another 30 to 40 seconds. But instead of silence, it was me having a conversation with a girl. It was unmistakably my voice, not just in sound, but in my speech patterns and mannerisms. Even weirder, I was talking about things that directly related to my life. I mentioned going skiing, but needing to go down to my shop and work on a car first, something that perfectly aligned with my actual activities. But I had never had that conversation, and I had no idea who the girl was. The message just stopped after that. It was recorded on one of those digital answering machines that stored messages on a chip, so there was no tape to analyze. Neither my friend nor I had a party line, so that was not an explanation. To this day, I cannot explain it. It was freaky. It was me, but I never said those words. Story 3. Driving home on a stormy day, I noticed that a side road leading up to the local golf course was blocked off by flashing barricades. Just past the barricades, a Mercedes was parked with its hazard lights on. Being an EMT, I pulled over to check if they needed help. I walked up to the car and shined my flashlight into the back seat, expecting to find someone passed out drunk. Instead, I saw a man slumped over, seemingly asleep. Moving up to the driver's window, I rapped on the glass and shined my light inside. The driver was sitting bolt upright, completely motionless, staring straight ahead. He did not blink. He did not flinch. He did not move. I looked over at the passenger. They were slumped forward against the dashboard, unresponsive. A chill ran down my spine. Feeling uneasy, I called the sheriff's station and requested a code to No Lights or Sirens unit to help me check them out. The doors were locked, and something about the scene just felt wrong. As I stayed on the phone with dispatch, I walked back to my truck to grab my go bag. Then, the dispatcher asked me to get the license plate number. At that moment, a PG&E cherry picker truck came rumbling down from the closed-off road. I stepped aside to let it pass, and as soon as it cleared my view, the car was gone. I immediately flagged down the PG&E worker and asked if he had seen where the Mercedes had gone. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said there was a massive 80-foot tree down across the road, and the way back was still barricaded. He did not think the road would be open for at least another day. So where the hell did the car go? To this day, I have no explanation. The road ahead was completely blocked. The way back was still closed. Since then, I have never felt completely at ease when stopping at accident scenes. Story 4. Back in 2008, I was at a friend's place. When we were teenagers, we had this awesome shed at his house where we hung out every weekend. It was more than just a shed. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, a TV, a fridge, basically everything we needed. It was our go-to spot. One night, we were all hanging out when I decided I needed to take a piss. I stepped out the front door of the shed and started walking to the right when I suddenly stopped. Let me explain the layout. If you walked out of the shed, my friend's house was to the left, and to the right was the area where we all parked our cars. Beyond that, there were just empty fields and scattered trees. By this time, it was dark. The lights from the house cast a glow between the house and our cars, but beyond that, it was mostly shadows. As I took a step toward the cars, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a solid 5 to 10 seconds as he stood, motionless, staring into the darkness. Then, without a word, he turned and walked behind a couple of trees and a car before disappearing from sight. It struck me as odd, so when I walked back into the shed, I casually asked my friend what his brother was doing out by the cars. Me: "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?" Him: "What do you mean?" Me: "He just walked off behind the cars." "Brother, I'm right here." I turned and saw him sitting in one of the chairs, drink in hand, wearing the exact same clothes I had just seen him in outside. The only way into the shed was through the front door, and I had been standing right in the doorway the whole time. There was no way he could have gotten past me without me noticing. To this day, I have no explanation. Maybe I was just seeing things, but the fact that I watched him move for a good 10 seconds still puzzles me. I have never experienced anything like that again. Story 5. Back in 2000, I got my wisdom teeth removed. Right around the time The Matrix was released on VHS, my surgery was rough, and I was completely out of my mind on Percocet afterward. My mum basically dropped me into bed and, knowing I had never seen the movie in theaters, went to rent it for me. I remember being annoyed that the sunlight was causing a glare on the TV, but I was too drugged up to do anything about it. At some point, right after the black cat glitch in the Matrix scene, I passed out cold. Apparently, I slept for about 8 hours. The VHS kept rewinding itself and playing on a loop the entire time. When I woke up, the movie was playing at almost the exact same spot as when I had passed out. But now it was completely dark outside. For me, there was zero time lapse. 1 second, it was daytime. The next, I was waking up to the same moment in the movie, but the sun was gone. I completely lost my mind. I started freaking out, screaming that I had figured out the secret, that somebody turned off the sun. I was crying, trying to explain what had happened to my panicked family, who had no idea what was going on. To this day, they have never let me live it down. Story 6. My dad had this little toy monkey that he used to jokingly call his favorite child. He would tease me and my siblings with it. Not in a mean way, but enough to drive us crazy. We spent hours trying to steal it from him. One day, we finally succeeded. After drawing all over it with a black Sharpie and mangling it a bit, we tossed it into the garbage. My dad laughed, searched for it for a while, but after about a week, he gave up, figuring it was gone for good. Years later, when I was about 17, I was walking down the street in Toronto. I did not live in Toronto. I was just visiting some friends. As I walked, something small and orange caught my eye on the side of the road. Curious, I walked over and picked it up. It was the exact same fucking monkey. It still had the black Sharpie marks from when we had drawn on it years earlier. I stood there in shock, trying to wrap my head around it. The garbage we had thrown it into should have ended up in a local dump, nowhere even close to Toronto. I still cannot even begin to calculate the chances of that happening. Story 7. I used to work as a satellite installer, and one day I was driving between two small towns in North Carolina, Statesville and Taylorsville. The drive was about 20 minutes on a perfectly straight 2-lane road with nothing but trees on either side. It was the middle of the day, and I was wide awake, listening to Howard Stern on Sirius Radio. Then, out of nowhere, I went from feeling completely normal to suddenly falling asleep. I mean instantly. 1 second, I was fine. The next, my head was drooping, my eyes closing. What snapped me out of it was my car suddenly bouncing, as if I had hit a speed bump. But I was still in the middle of the road. Howard Stern was still in the exact same sentence, but my GPS had lost its signal. Then I heard, recalculating. When the GPS came back, I realized I was about 12 miles further down the road than I had been, and I had missed my turn by 5 miles. My immediate thought, despite being a level-headed atheist, was that I had fallen asleep, crashed into a tree, and died. For a few intense moments, I truly believed I was in some weird afterlife. The feeling was so overwhelming that I drove to the nearest gas station, parked, and walked inside with my palms sweating. I was convinced the cashier wouldn't be able to see me. To my relief, she did. I bought a Red Bull and tried to shake the feeling. To this day, I believe I must have gone into some kind of highway hypnosis and driven on autopilot. But the fact that my GPS signal was lost, my car bounced like I hit something, even though the road was clear, and I didn't miss a single second of the Howard Stern show. Even when I rewound it on Sirius, still freaks me out. Story 8. I used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements. The lab equipment I worked on was in the lowest basement, and I had the only key to access it. There was a wired phone in that basement, and sometimes I worked late at night. But not this night. I was asleep in my apartment, 10 miles away from work, when my cell phone rang at 3 a.m. It was my girlfriend, completely hysterical, asking me why I had just tried to scare her. I had no idea what she was talking about. Through sobs, she told me she had just received a call from the basement phone at my work, the one I had the only key to. On the line, someone who sounded exactly like me had slowly repeated her name over and over, until the call crackled and faded out. I thought she had to be messing with me. But then I checked her phone myself. The 3 a.m. call from the basement phone was logged in her call history. I still have no explanation, and it still freaks me the fuck out. Story 9. I have two stories that are just weird as fuck. If someone else told me these, I probably would not believe them. But I swear with every fiber of my being that they happened exactly as I am writing them here. The A&W doppelgängers. A couple of years ago, my mom and I went to A&W for lunch. We were sitting there eating our meals and happened to be near the washroom doors. I noticed people coming and going, but I was not paying much attention. Then, an old man came out of the bathroom. He had a noticeable limp, was wearing specific clothes, and had a distinct face. He walked past me, and I went back to my meal. Not even 30 seconds later, another man walked out of the bathroom, and it was the exact same fucking guy. Same limp, same clothing, same face. I froze for a moment, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was just seeing things. A couple of minutes later, it happened again. But this time, with an old woman. She walked out of the bathroom, went past me, and about 30 seconds later, she came out of the bathroom again. I must have gone pale because my mum looked at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just stammered something and wrote it off as me going crazy. But to this day, I know what I saw. The shotgun and the out-of-body experience. The second story is far weirder and is, without a doubt, the single strangest thing that has ever happened to me. I was 9 years old, visiting family in Nevada with my dad. They lived out in a dry, rural area in a good-sized trailer. A couple of days into the visit, I was outside playing in the dirt with my cousin, just messing around. At some point, I looked up. Right next to the house was a field, surrounded by a wire fence. It was probably used for livestock at some point. But what caught my eye was a man standing in the field, about 300 feet away. I could not see him clearly. He was too far away. But something about him made me uneasy. Then, the weirdest thing in my entire life happened. The second I looked at him, my entire body locked up. It was like I had lost control. I was no longer seeing through my own eyes. I was inside his body. I was seeing through his eyes. From his perspective, I could see two little shapes playing across the field. Me and my cousin. But I could feel that he did not see us as kids. He saw us as animals. And then I noticed something in his hands. A fucking shotgun. The moment I realized this, I snapped back into my own body. My vision was mine again, and I could move. Without hesitation, I blurted out, "We have to go indoors." I did not explain why. My cousin thought I was crazy, but I knew we had to get inside. I never told anyone because, at the time, I did not even know how to explain what had just happened. Years later, I finally told my brothers, but I do not think they believed me. Even now, it still freaks me out. It is the only time in my life I have ever completely lost control of my own body. It did not feel like a dream. It felt real, but like everything was moving in slow motion. I have no idea what actually happened that day. Story 10. I used to work in music and toured with a band. The guitarist, Josh, had a best friend named Matt, who had died a couple of years before. Josh talked about him all the time. He sounded like a great guy. But Josh also had this recurring dream about Matt, and it really haunted him. In the dream, Matt was always standing in the middle of an abandoned street. Josh believed the street was metaphorical for purgatory, a place where Matt was stuck, since Matt had overdosed unexpectedly. Josh felt like his spirit was unable to move on. In these dreams, they would have long conversations. But at the end of every dream, Matt would reach up and take a bulb from a streetlight, pulling it free before fading away. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail, so vividly that I could picture the exact street in my mind. Fast forward 6 months into the tour. The guys in the band were huge Bright Eyes fans, and they wanted to stop in Cassadaga, Florida, a place known for its spiritual mediums and eerie energy. Bright Eyes singer had written an album there, and the whole town had this creepy, mystical reputation. Now, It might be worth noting that 6 out of the 7 people in our group were atheists. None of them believed in the supernatural. We drove into Casadaga around 2 or 3 a.m. The streets were deserted, the atmosphere heavy. We wandered around aimlessly, unsure of what we were even looking for. Then, out of nowhere, a huge black dog stepped into the road in front of us. It stopped and just stared at us. The guys in the band, being the weirdos they were, started saying, "Follow the dog. It's trying to show us something." Meanwhile, I was just sitting there thinking, these guys are absolute fucking idiots. But we followed the dog anyway. For a few blocks, the dog walked slowly, leading us deeper into town. Then, all of a sudden, it bolted, disappearing around a corner. We turned onto the street where the dog had vanished. Josh immediately freaked out. "Stop the fucking van, this is it." We were all confused, but he jumped out, looking around. "This is the street from my dreams." We stayed there for about 15 minutes as he took it all in. Everything matched. The layout of the houses on the left, the park on the right, it was exactly what he had described. Then, just as we were about to leave, a street light flickered and went out. We all just sat there in stunned silence for a moment. Then we drove away. Josh never had another dream about Matt after that night. He believed that finding that street gave him the closure he needed, that whatever was keeping Matt there had finally let go. Story 11. My dad used to get up around 3 a.m. every morning for work. Ever since I was little, I would wake up on my own and wander downstairs just to see him before he left. One morning, when I was about 4 years old, I made it to the bottom of the stairs and noticed that the front door was slightly open. That was strange. I walked over, pushed it open wider, and looked outside. There, walking down the driveway, was my dad, dressed in his usual work outfit, his favorite plaid work shirt and Dickies pants, heading toward his truck. Without thinking, I swung the door open wide and yelled out, "Dad, come back, I want a hug." He stopped. Slowly he turned around and just stared at me. Something about the way he looked at me felt off. He did not respond, did not move, just stood there staring. Then, after a few long seconds, he started walking back toward the house. But his expression remained strange. His face was unreadable, and his eyes felt wrong. A creeping fear took hold of me. I started crying, asking, "What's wrong?" Just as he was about to reach me, I suddenly felt arms wrap around me from behind in a bear hug. I turned my head and saw my real father standing behind me, holding me tight. My actual dad was still inside the house. We both stood there, frozen, staring at his doppelganger, a perfect copy of him, dressed exactly the same, standing at the end of our driveway. Then, without a word, the double spun around and bolted down the driveway into the darkness. My dad yanked me inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Weirdest morning ever. I might have dismissed it as a faulty childhood memory, but my dad saw it too. He never liked to talk about it. But my mum later told me that he called out of work that day and spent the rest of it pacing, shaken, while she reassured him that he wasn't crazy. Story 12. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was at my girlfriend's house watching a movie. Around 10 p.m, the movie ended, and I got ready to head home. I only lived 2 blocks away, so I decided to skateboard back. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood. No reason to worry. As I skated down a hill toward a larger street, I planned to blast straight across the intersection, since there were no cars coming in either direction. Then, I hit a rock. My board stopped dead, and I flew forward. I skidded 3 or 4 feet on my head, right shoulder, hip, and knee, before finally coming to a stop. The pain was unbearable. I rolled onto my back and screamed in agony. I could barely move. Then I looked up. A car was coming. It was about 30 yards away, heading straight toward me, and I was right in its path. This was a 2-lane road, and I had landed directly in the middle of its lane. My head lined up perfectly with its wheel. I tried like hell to move. I screamed, yelled, but my body would not respond. The car kept coming, 15 yards. No reaction from the driver, no swerving, no attempt to stop. 10 yards. I could hear the engine roaring. I could see the headlights shining down on me. I closed my eyes and braced for impact. Nothing. I opened my eyes. The car was gone. I could still hear its engine, but instead of hitting me, it was already behind me. Its taillights fading as it cruised up the road. I had not moved. It had not swerved. There was no way it had passed over me. I was completely in its path, and it was a small car. I cannot explain it. I got up, terrified, bloody and baffled, hobbled home, and went to bed. No one believed me, but it's fucking true. Story 13. History was always my thing, and I was doing well in class. One day, the teacher decided to split us into teams for a group quiz, but he made it extra difficult by choosing the hardest questions he could think of. My group ended up winning with all the answers correct, mostly because of me. If I'm being completely honest and a little immodest, someone on the losing team, clearly frustrated, looked at me and said, "Jesus Christ, danger_MacBoom. Did you memorize the frickin' book?" To prove his point, he grabbed a textbook, flipped it open to a random page, and challenged me. "All right, what's the little factoid on the side of page 492? I had no idea. But right before the quiz, I had been casually flipping through my book and happened to read a random factoid on the side of the page. It was about the genocide in Rwanda, appropriately titled, Genocide in Rwanda. That was the only thing that came to mind, so I took a deep breath, stayed completely calm, and said, "Genocide in Rwanda." His mouth dropped open. He slammed the book shut, looked me dead in the eye, and said, very matter-of-factly, "Fuck you." To this day, I have no idea what the chances were that he randomly flipped to the exact page I had just read and asked about the one paragraph I happened to glance at. It remains my favorite mindfuck of all time. Story 14. 3 years ago, I had a dream that a meteor ripped through my house and my neighbor's house. It felt like something out of a war movie, like when a bomb goes off and everything is chaos. In the dream, my roommate and I were disoriented and semi-deaf, stumbling through fire and rubble, screaming as we searched for our roommates and neighbors. It was horrific. It felt real, painful, and when I woke up, I was shaken. I told my roommate about it that morning, but I brushed it off as just a really bad nightmare. 3 hours later, our whole house started rumbling. We heard a sound like a turbine engine powering down directly over us, followed by 2 massive explosions. We ran outside and saw billowing black smoke. We raced around the block to see what happened. And there, on the other side, were 2 houses, completely destroyed. A fighter jet had crashed through them. The houses were torn apart, and what little was still standing was on fire. We started yelling, trying to see if anyone was inside. Then my roommate looked at me and said, "Dude, your dream." I like to say it was just a coincidence, because I don't believe in stuff like that, but I still can't explain it. Story 15. My family owns a house on Cape Cod. The previous owner was a white supremacist who had an autistic son named Jimmy. Jimmy was known for wearing a trench coat and fedora, climbing trees, and shooting cats and dogs with a BB gun. When my parents moved into the house, they found a bedroom filled with Nazi paraphernalia. They put everything in the shed, told the former owner he had a week to take it, and when he didn't, they threw it out. At the time, I was only 7 years old, and I didn't know any of this. That's when I was visited. For 5 nights in a row, I saw a dark figure in a trench coat and fedora standing in my room. He had no detail, just a silhouette, like he was being powerfully backlit, but there was no light source. Some nights, he would stand in the corner of the room. Other times, he would be crouched down or sitting on my brother's bed, though my brother was away at summer camp. One time, he sat in a rocking chair. I turned away for a second, and when I looked back, he was gone. But the chair was still rocking. After a few nights of this, I finally told my parents. My mum called it a nightmare, but my dad was intrigued. He told me, "Next time, say, 'Jimmy, I don't have your stuff.'" The next night, when the figure appeared again in the corner of my room, I gathered my courage and said, "Jimmy, I don't have your stuff." Jimmy walked right over to me, put his face an inch away from mine, and then disappeared. I never saw him again. Years later, I learned about the history of the house. I've often wondered if I had heard something about it before and somehow suppressed it, then imagined my encounters with Jimmy. But the memory of him is still vivid. To this day, I don't know if it was just my imagination or something else. And that's it for tonight's collection of mind-bending glitch in the matrix stories. If these tales left you questioning reality or gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe to Panda's Nightmares for more eerie and thought-provoking content. Hit the like button, follow for updates, and check out my other videos for even more unsettling stories. And one last thing, if you can, please consider supporting my dad's medical treatment through the GoFundMe link in the description. Your kindness and generosity truly mean the world to me. Thank you for watching, and remember, reality might not be as solid as we think. Stay aware, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.